Welcome to Making the Grade, the podcast that explores what's driving the decline in graduation rates between funding rounds and what it really takes to scale a venture-backed software startup successfully with realistic options to exit. I'm Tom Glasson, CEO at Scalewise, and each week I'm going to be joined by founders, investors, and some of the best go-to-market leaders in the world to unpack the strategies, the missteps, and the mindset shifts that separate those who graduate from those who don't. Expect real talk, actionable go-to-market insights, and honest stories that will help you scale more wisely and thrive in an increasingly competitive market. Because there is a smarter way to scale, and we're here to uncover it. Today's guest is someone I've known and admired for well over a decade. Beth Ayers has built and led commercial engines as a CRO. She's scaled companies as a COO and has now stepped into the CEO seat at Metomic, right at the moment that AI is fundamentally reshaping how B2B SaaS businesses operate. Beth has been at the sharp end of the 2 to 10 million journey multiple times, and she's known for being brutally honest on what actually breaks companies in that messy middle between product market fit and scale. From hiring the wrong leaders to poorly defined ICPs and go-to-market motions that simply don't work. In this episode, we dig into what good really looks like at that stage and what changes when you go AI first, including one of the boldest OKRs I've seen this year, hiring 50 AI employees in a single quarter. This is an episode you definitely don't want to miss. Beth, I am genuinely excited to have you on Making the Grade. Welcome, and how are you today?
Yeah, great. It's great to be on today, Tom. Thanks for having me. I think we've known each other well over a decade, if we think about it. So
Gosh, I think you're right. Now you're just making me feel old, though. I kind of, in my mind, it was only a decade, maybe just now I feel even older. So Beth, let's just kick off. So you and I have seen a lot of companies that are trying to kind of push through that 2 million to 10 million range, that kind of what I call the messy middle. Over the last few years, I know you've seen that journey a few times. In your experience, what do founders consistently underestimate about that stage, that part of the journey?
So I don't know if it's an underestimating, but getting it wrong over and over again is not hiring stage-specific execs still. And they're like, oh, well, they've worked at name any massive company, therefore they must know what's right. We're in scale-up mode, they can scale. And the person who's worked at Salesforce, has worked at IBM, for old school, has worked at any known brand with thousands or tens of thousands of people, will not know how to be as scrappy as you need to be at 2 to 10. And they'll also cost a lot of money. Black books are massively overrated. They're not if you're hiring for partnerships, channel, business development, then black books work. But for any sort of sales, it just doesn't.
Well, I'm sure we'll dig into that in a bit more detail, but I'd love to just keep thinking about this 2 to 10 journey as well. And when you think about the companies that you've helped scale through that phase, what does good go-to-market actually look like, going from 2 to 10? And maybe what are some of the non-negotiables in your playbook?
Well, it's so funny because I feel like all of my answers are going to be irrelevant. And I don't think any of us know what it actually looks like for good go-to-market right now because AI is changing everything. So I almost feel like I can answer from the old playbook and I'm probably entirely wrong. So I'm trying to think about what are the things that AI are not affecting. Founders moving away from sales too quickly because they feel like they've hired a professional sales organization and therefore we don't need founder-led sales anymore. And then they just run away and then get upset when the new sales leader gets it wrong because they haven't actually bothered to train the sales leader or explain what they've learned in their 10,000 hours of selling the product, or not stepping away enough, disempowering a sales leader and running all of the sales still.
What's the right balance there? Like, give me a sense as to when you think it's time to step away, but also when stepping away, how involved or what should the founder continue to be involved in as it relates to customer and new business?
So part of it is, in my experience, founders don't know why they're selling, don't know the tricks, just know that when they see somebody else not doing what they're supposed to do, they get very upset and take over. Every so often, you might find somebody who knows how who can figure out what it is that they do that is successful and can articulate it, but it's rare. And so in the past, I would have suggested hiring a person who could have so many titles, could be a chief of staff, could be product marketing, could be strategy, could be sales, who is able to really articulate and look at what the seller is doing and then translate that for everyone else. But now that we have AI, I don't think you necessarily have to hire that skill in. What you need to do is record all of your conversations with customers, run it through an AI, and figure out what it is that means that you're a successful salesperson. Distill that and articulate that to your next hires.
Yeah, you touch on such an important point there. And I'm sure we're going to come onto AI and how that can support that transition from founder-led selling into a more scalable and repeatable sales motion that people that aren't founders can do. But when you come back to that stage of 2 to 10, were there any other things in your playbooks that were like, right, this is the thing that we need to nail when we're on that journey? Like the 0 to 1 or the 0 to 2, I think that can be very scrappy. You can very much be led by the founder. But when you're trying to create repeatability and predictability on that 2 to 10, you've moved from product market fit to go to market fit. Are there any things in your playbooks as a COO, but also as a CRO that you were like, these are the things we really need to nail. These are the big changes that need to happen, between that 2 to 10.
Clarity. So you need to have a backward sales plan. You need to have pipeline targets. You need to have top of funnel targets, and you need to hold people to account. It's fine to have a target that and nobody believes in, nobody delivers, and you're like, oh yeah, that wasn't a real target. Like, that's not what you need. And then sometimes I also see people are like, that's an impossible target. And then therefore we lower the target where, but don't also lower the output of the sales. Like, if that is the top line that you're absolutely determined you have to get to, great to have somebody say, I have no idea how I'm going to generate that pipeline. But the answer isn't to then just generate less pipeline or to like magically it's going to appear. You have to have full on conversations and solve, how are you going to build that top pipe? Do you need more budget, different channels? What are sales accountable for? How are you going to help sales generate pipeline? And you have to have a plan that will work. The outcome will never be the same as what you think your plan is, but you have to be able to work through a plan that you can believe in the first part. Otherwise, you're expecting growth that you're not going to see.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you mentioned pipeline there, because that is one of the biggest challenges that we see within ScaleWise client base and the companies that I've worked within, which is when you're going from 2 to 10 and often maybe you've raised a Series A, you've committed to some aggressive growth goals, and that pipeline, that demand gen engine needs to be able to keep up with and support those goals. How do you think about the kind of order of operations as it relates to kind of building that go-to-market team out and how to be thinking about investments into marketing and demand gen versus sales? Or, do you expect salespeople to create all the pipeline? When you're thinking about that repeatability and that scalability, how do you think about investments into these various facets of what makes a healthy go-to-market engine?
It really depends on what your ICP is or how many different customer cohorts you have, and are you going to back all of them? Because they all have different sales motions. So the first thing is to be clear. Are you enterprise sales, whale hunting? You can win 2 deals a year and that's going to transform your business. Or are you PLG? Or do you do a bunch of 20 to 30K deals and therefore you need a really high velocity, high volume sales engine? What I see is people don't understand what they're actually trying to achieve and what their sales motion is, and then hire the wrong people and grow something that's irrelevant. I'll see just as often it's an enterprise deal. And maybe it's, I was talking about the big enterprise, a couple million per opportunity. But even if it's like 150, 200K, but there's expansion and that's where you're going to get your growth, don't go and try and build a high volume sales engine and hire a bunch of people who love closing a deal a month. It is just such a mismatch. And you'll end up hiring the wrong sales leader who wants all of this scaffolding to create a volume engine. And you're not going to get in the pipeline that you need, and you're not going to hire the right people. Or conversely, that you're doing 20 to 60, 100K deals and you need a lot of them to grow. Well, then you're really going to have to hire and build pipeline, and you're going to have to rely on a lot of inbound. in the first instance. And so hire your marketing and your demand gen to start with and see where your growth's coming from.
How do you think about ICP on this part of the journey? Because what worked maybe at 0 to 1 with the founder selling, may not work, or maybe you need to actually thinking about new segments of the market or new ICPs. Any advice for companies that are kind of thinking about how should we evolve our ICP? What should we be thinking about as it relates to reviewing our ICP? How should we even define our ICP?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. And I think one of the things that companies get wrong is thinking we've defined our ICP and it's static and it never changes, in the same way as like we have product market fit and therefore we're good to throw on all of the gasoline onto the fire. And both of those things can change and they can change overnight. And so you need to be constantly looking and reevaluating, do you still have product market fit with this right ICP? And so what you should be looking at is not just do we win deals and who do we win the most deals with, but do we retain those customers? And that's where a CRO versus a head of sales is quite good, because a CRO cares about the entire life cycle. A head of sales is like, not my problem. I'll hit my commission. It's the CS leader's problem to retain them. But if they're fundamentally the wrong customers, it's everybody's problem. So you need to look at your full life cycle and determine who your ICP is. And then it's down to the velocity of your pipeline and your win rates as good indicators. And also, I'm a real fan of narrowing uncomfortably small on an ICP to begin with. And you might think when you're at 1 million, 2 million ARR, 10 million is like massive. And how are we ever going to get there? And that's like a real business and a scaled business. But 10 million is tiny still. And you should really narrow down on the segment that you can win the most. Sales hates it. It's uncomfortable. It's intuitively wrong that if you narrow the net, you're going to win more, but it actually works.
And when you say narrow, and I love uncomfortably narrow, as you say, as a term, what does that actually look like in practice?
So it is, what is your actual demographic? So, or firmographic that you're looking for. So how big is the company? What sector are they in? And I'm saying sector, maybe one, maybe two sectors, but not, okay, unless it's a really horizontal play, but then fine, it's a horizontal play and you're only talking to HR people. Like, what is that narrow area that you're playing in? Do they have certain tech? Do they grow at a certain rate? Do they have to have a certain persona within the business that you know you're going to sell to? Or if they don't have that persona, you're never going to get the deal over the line. And so maybe you're looking at 500 customers, 2,000 customers. It's not a lot, but you get to know that world really well and you build a product for that world to begin with. And then you know where you're going to go after that, but you stick with and really build a product.
You mentioned CROs earlier, and we've both seen founders get this kind of hiring sequencing wrong between 2 and 10 million. As you said earlier, sometimes it's about just hiring the wrong profile of sales leader, that stage fit being really important. But from your perspective, when does it make sense to hire a CRO, like a proper CRO? And maybe give us a sense as to which roles or which other roles you think sometimes are mistimed or misunderstood during that phase.
Well, first of all, I think a lot of people hire a head of sales and give them the CRO title. And so that's not what I'm talking about. And it's annoying that it's almost synonymous now that a head of sales is a CRO. So what I'm talking about for a CRO is somebody that actually owns revenue, and that is sales, customer success, sometimes marketing, sometimes not, because you can argue about how is it revenue itself, and sometimes delivery, which you don't see often, but sometimes you do. Like if delivery again is very important, but you need somebody who's worrying about bringing in customers and retaining customers. You have to actually figure out what you're trying to build first and then apply the right sales play or the right playbook. And I feel like this gets misused in two ways. Either person applies the wrong playbook because they like the sound of it and it gets everything wrong, or they hear there is no playbook. I do it myself in my own way and make all of the mistakes that they could have learned from others. In general, I would not hire, assuming B2B SaaS that has a mid-market and enterprise motion, I would hire a head of sales before I hire a CRO. But if you have a real land and expand with a high velocity, I'd hire a CRO before a head of sales.
Mm. And how early would that be, do you think, in terms of revenue?
Yeah, I think 2-3 million if it's with high growth rates and a proven land and expand motion.
So even without the heads of those kind of go-to-market functions in place, there's maybe no head of CS, there's maybe no head of sales, your advice would be put in a CRO to lead those individual contributors.
And who can then build in that next layer. I guess it also depends on how well funded you are. If you have a couple million, probably not a CRO, but if you have 10 in the bank, yeah, I go for a CRO and have them build out a good organization.
And when do you think it makes sense for marketing to report into CROs? Because this is obviously a bone of contention, and I see some CROs without and some with marketing reporting into them. When do you think that makes sense?
I don't know if marketing as a function still exists, should exist. I think there's a lot of misnomers in it.
Oh, now we're getting some meaty stuff. Let's pull on that thread, Beth.
So demand gen, including ABM, makes a lot of sense to sit with sales because, or with a CRO, because the CRO, how are they going to feed themselves? How are they going to grow pipe? How are they going to retain pipe? Branding, thought leadership, vibes, like is marketing in a separate, and I think a CRO owning it kills it.
Interesting. At that 2 to 10 million stage, what cadence or kind of rituals genuinely move the needle from a kind of operating rhythm standpoint?
There should also be a real conversation with product. I think product gets let off the hook too often, and it's all about sales and marketing, but fundamentally, we need a good product. So, how do you feedback voice of the customer? How do you actually validate what you need to build? Because the other thing that sales do is talk to somebody, they ask for some random feature. The salesperson's like, "Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, like, let's do that random feature." One of the things that we did at New Voice Media that, like, we didn't really believe in, but you have a sales leader who is very compelling and can talk a good game. And it was like, one of our customers absolutely wanted single-sided call recording because they're like, "Well, even if we're just recording our rep, we're GDPR compliant, but that will still give us good information and training." And we had to do, like, so much work to be able to do single-sided call recording. And our CRO, sales leader was like, "Yeah, I could sell to this company, this company, this company." And nobody actually went and did the second conversations, and we've spent a quarter, built it. Nobody wanted it. Like, why would I only want to record me? Who else would I record? I don't even think our customer ended up using it more than 6 months. And it's like, and so although we were having good conversations, we weren't adding in that next level of validation and not just blindly believing a sales leader. So you need to have what's going on in the market combined with validating to then build a good product. And also, if we're going like, at 2 to 10, there's no point getting really surgical about it. Like, we're going to build X feature and it's going to deliver Y amount of pipeline and we're going to track it. Like, that's just a pointless, like, annoyance. But you should be like, we're delivering something big. And this is how we're going to push it. And it's part of what's going to drive pipeline rather than getting like super scientific about it. But you should know that what you're building, we can sell.
Mm. And as you say, the flip side of that, what we're selling, we know the product team can build. How do you think about holding product teams accountable to commercial outcomes? Because that's the big challenge I see and hear about as well. It's like, the CRO, the revenue lead is holding the number, but how do we create accountability around the product org?
So I think the product org should have the same, or the product leader, and therefore the product org should have the same KPIs as the CS leader. So gross revenue retention, net revenue retention, and NPS. Because fundamentally, we need to have a good product that customers love to use and want to buy more of. And that is the responsibility of the product leader as much of it is the CS leader. I actually think that CS shouldn't exist. I'm not a big fan of it. I think that we should have account managers and support teams, and that most of customer success is just plastering over the cracks of a bad product. And we need to have a better product.
So we've got no more marketing, no more CS. So tell me more about CS, because you're right. They do plaster over a lot of cracks, and often they end up becoming glorified support team agents. But what about, if you're thinking about onboarding and enablement and ensuring that that time to value is quick, would you put that in the hands of an account manager, an AE? Like, how do you think about that part of the CS role?
Well, do you remember when we used to have professional services?
Yeah, I do. Bring it back. Bring back
Well,
the
why not?
CS.
Yeah, because all like professional services is about a project set in time. CS goes on forever.
Yeah. And then in terms of, I suppose, the account manager's responsibility, and we always have this debate about, you know, who should own the renewal, who should own the upsell, is your view that actually that should all sit within the account managers? The sale new business should do new business, and then we hand it over and we let them expand and renew. Where's the cutoff there between new business and AMs?
A lot of times it's new business throws it over the fence to account managers, they expand. But sometimes if you're running a real land and expand, it's doing new business a disservice because here they've gone, landed it, and then they lose it before you see the real money. So I'm fine, depending on where your motion is, to leave it with the new business team for X amount of time slash forever. Again, at New Voice Media, we had hybrid reps and we did that for probably, yeah, until 10, maybe even 15 million. And it was only at that point, maybe somewhere between 12 and 15, that we moved to having a new business team and an account management team because we had so much expansion that our reps weren't winning new customers and they weren't incentivized to win new customers because they could make it all from expansion. And that was hurting our future. And that's when we took it off of them. But for a very long time, all we cared about was bringing in money, and we were fine to have a hybrid rep.
Yeah, makes sense. And a couple of themes so far that we've talked about seem to be reducing headcount, whether that be in marketing or maybe in customer success. But obviously AI is going to play a big role in perhaps reducing headcount over the years. And I have to call out your AI post on LinkedIn. I'm sure it created a big stir, and I'm sure there's lots of people that want to pick your brains about what you're thinking of here, because you said you were going to hire 50 AI employees in a quarter, and that isn't something you hear every day. So you've clearly moved beyond experimentation into full adoption. What does hiring AI coworkers actually look like inside Metomic, and how did you get to this point?
To want to hire AI employees, it was actually from my podcast. We interviewed a CEO in America who was doing this at Concord. It's a contract management system. And I was just like, oh, tell me more. And it was fascinating. I was like, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And so now we have been learning how to do it this at Metomic. So we don't have very many agents. We have more agents on the engineering side where I think things are a little bit more advanced and easier. And also we're a small company, so agents aren't necessarily wildly appropriate for us at the moment. But what we do have are lots of employees that make us smarter and faster. So we have one that is, so we sell to CISOs. And so we have a CISO who tells us whether or not we're full of shit. So every piece of marketing content, every white paper, every blog post goes through Charlie, the CISO, and Charlie tells us cynically that it sounds like a bunch of marketing malarkey and is highly cynical, and this is what we should say instead. And we have one that's a CFO as well, who just holds us to a higher account. We have some that generate data for us, so like synthetic data. I have one that helps me write my board reports. I have another one that helps me write my Slack update at the end of the week, every week. So those are ones I've written myself. So they're like quite specified bits of content. We have one that is a little bit of an automation between helping us create data sheets and then feeding into Figma to design the data sheet. And then we get our final product. So it's just massively sped up.
And are these, when you give these examples, are these actual agents that are doing things, or are these LLMs that you've kind of trained to think and respond in a certain way? Like, talk through practically how you've built these things.
So for the most part, they're LLMs that we've trained. So we've given them job descriptions. We've told them what good looks like. We also hold them to account. So like in the beginning, building an LLM and you're like, oh, well, that content's not very good, or they're making wonky mistakes, and then walking away isn't the answer, and then not using them. So it's taking the time to give them feedback, train them better, retrain them so that the content that they produce is really good, or the insights that they produce are good. It has just massively sped us up. In terms of agents, it's more on the engineering side. And so you can massively speed up the rate of coding and have like these little micro bits that you can throw into your coding. So on our engineering side, we lost some engineers, couldn't handle all of the chaos of 3 CEOs in 6 months, and were ready for a change. We were planning on backfilling them, and we haven't, because through using AI, our productivity is the same as it was with an additional 5 engineers.
Wow, that's awesome. So let's talk about go to market and the use of AI there as well, because I completely get the use case within coding and engineering, but I think people are still looking for those silver bullets within go to market. And I think you gave an example publicly about an AI agent that identifies lookalikes, writes personalized emails, sequences them directly into HubSpot. Tell us more about that and maybe what impact it's had on some of the key metrics you care about.
So we have it's kind of like multiple agents built on a automation platform that go out, find lookalikes, do all of the enrichment, great at finding phone numbers. We then feed it into a power dialer, or they're not called power dialers anymore, parallel dialer, that then it scores the leads as well. So looks at intent, looks at who's been visiting the site, fits certain criteria that we're looking for, scores them, orders them, puts them into a parallel dialer for our SDR, who then can just hit the phones, sends out emails, sends out follow-up sequences, is drafting the emails. That took a really long time to get right. Yeah, so that it's something that you need to do is, and this is actually another person, another guest on our podcast who I'd highly recommend. Amazing. And one of the advice that she gave is, before you link all of your agents together or all of your LLMs together to make a complete workflow or agent, make sure every single one of them does their job well, and then connect them to each other. So we took a while to get lookalikes right. Like, it's easy to say, fine, go find us lookalikes. We were able to find lookalike companies very easily. Lookalike personas ended up being difficult because the AI was too wanting to please. So it's like, okay, we want this persona. Oh, I don't find enough of that persona. So what about this persona? And then and then we've ended up with like not a lookalike in any way, and having to like go, stop, don't please us. Like 10 good ones is better than 1,000 bad ones. And so fitting all of those elements in, and that's why writing good emails took quite a while to get a good hook. And then we added it in, and then we had a human in a loop, and then we were happy and we stepped away. So it's an iterative process to ensure good quality. It's not like you can build it. You could probably technically build it in a couple days, but it actually takes 6 to 8 weeks to get it good.
I think the big question here is what impact has that actually had on some of the metrics, whether that be pipeline generation, SDR productivity, speed? Like, tell us about some of the things that you've seen as a result of implementing it.
SDR productivity would be the number one impact. So I've laid out for the team a vision of being AI first means that our default is to do it with AI before we hire a person. I have said, what would it take to be 100 million ARR business with 50 employees? And that's the goal that we're looking at. So when we're hiring somebody, we have to know that AI can't do it, and it's a skill that's missing in the business. And that's across the entire business. We are next year hiring more in go to market and sales than we are anywhere else in the business. But even that is fairly low numbers, with a belief that we'll get more out of AI. So right now we have an SDR who is doing 2 SDRs, possibly 3 SDRs worth of work, because all he has to do is the calling.
Wow. And when you say doing 2 or 3 SDRs work, are we talking about overall productivity in the sense of pipeline creation, SQOs creation. So we've now got them, rather than creating 10 a month, they're creating 20 or 30. Is it that level of productivity?
Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome.
So that's because of all of the busy work.
Mm, mm.
There's so much busy work.
Which I think is a really nice lead on to the other thought I had, which is, you're a first-time CEO. You've been probably deep in the 2026 planning process, maybe even completed by now, hopefully. But doing that in an AI-first environment must bring an extra level of kind of complexity to that process, because how are you actually thinking about those headcount budget assumptions for next year and maybe even out to 2027? Like, how are you thinking about, baking some of those assumptions, maybe wishes or hopes, into the reality of a headcount budget and model that ultimately you're going to get signed off with the board?
It is tricky because there's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of unproven at the moment. And so what I've ended up doing is have assumptions on the areas that we know about. So engineering, SDRs. I feel like we can get more productivity out of sales, but I don't know that yet. So I'm actually using just normal sales productivity numbers for this year. We do have less headcount at mid-year preparing for 27 than we normally would do in the old SaaS model. But then by June, we'll be able to readjust that and see what we're seeing in the first half of the year.
So any advice for other people that are maybe in that process and thinking about what should they bake into their model and what shouldn't they? Like, how should they be thinking about it?
Well, so I guess I'm just thinking like, what is the most important thing? Where can it fall down the biggest? And that's sales productivity. And so I'm being most conservative on sales productivity than anything else. And then also like the upside is, so the upside is if they're as productive as I hope, then you have some extra. If they're not as productive, you're at least going to cover your numbers. Putting more into tools than in the past. And so the cost per head for tooling has gone up. And then also really, really thinking about missing skills. Every single time is what is the skill that we need, and let's hire for that skill. And I think that's maybe why I'm talking about, does CS still exist? Does marketing still exist? And I think they do, but it's about getting really specific about the skills and the activities that they're doing. And therefore, what do you need? So do you need an entire CMO, or do you need an amazing brand person combined with an amazing growth person?
Any new roles that you're budgeting for, like AI ops or workflow architects or prompt strategists, or like you thinking about having budget set aside for those new roles?
Yeah. So I was really cynical about go to market engineers. And I just thought go to market engineers was a rebranding of RevOps. And I was just like, what's the point? What is it? And I think a lot of go to market engineers are rebranded RevOps, particularly since Clay invented it and Clay wants everybody to use their platform. Whereas I think that like an internal engineer that's one of the roles that we're hiring for, with a view to having fewer individual tools and more automations built on something, but like actually being coded rather than stitching together so many SaaS tools. So that's part of it, is getting rid of a lot of SaaS tools that we have today and figuring out what are a few that we can use to build everything on, and then really doing the build versus buy debate. So for me, I think Cora is cheaper to buy versus build, but there's a lot of particularly back office stuff where it must be, given our size, cheaper to build.
Interesting. And any kind of pushback in terms of adoption from the teams? Because obviously you're really leaning hard into AI and you're obviously pushing people, holding them accountable to implementing this and using it. What have you seen from a resistance standpoint, and how have you overcome that?
So there was definitely resistance at the beginning. I had one person, I did like a bunch of one-to-ones when I first joined, and I had one of the engineers say, I know people are telling you can't get more productivity out of engineering using AI, but like we're at the max. We have everything that we already have and don't think you can get any more productivity. And how he's just using it so much more. And it's like his eyes are open to what else you can do with it. So some of it is people just didn't understand what was possible. And so we did an offsite in October where we took 2 days out of the office. The first day I brought in 2 trainers. One trainer was on how to use ChatGPT. and all of the bits of it. And you think you know it, but you actually don't, or you do know it, but you don't think of all the different ways you could use the functionality. So the whole team loved the training day. And then the second half was just for engineers, all about Claude Code. It was an exhausting day. I would recommend splitting the training over 2 days, because by the end of that day, I sat through the Claude Code training. Like my brain was just leaking out of my ears. Everybody was super exhausted. And then the second day was a day of building AI employees, building the automations, thinking about and applying everything they learned from the first day. Team loved it. So we're going to carry on doing that every quarter, because what you actually need is, it's fine to give people training, but you need to give them the space and the time to take to improve the products, to slow down, to speed up. And then we have a fortnightly show and tell, which is just like normal show and tell. Oh, actually, that's something that I would recommend. Our show and tell is half product showing new features they've developed, and half go to market feeding back on the products and what they've heard from the market and requests, and the good and the bad of what's just been released. And then we also have somebody talk about what they've done in AI. We have an AI channel where everybody shows off and talks about stuff. And then in engineering, we've also introduced a leaderboard.
Nice. I sense we could talk about AI for hours, but just switching gears a little bit, I'd love to talk a bit about diversity in tech and in commercial leadership in particular, because you've been a CRO, you've been a COO, you're now a CEO. But as we both know, commercial leadership roles and just leadership roles more broadly are still overwhelmingly male. From your perspective, what needs to change to bring more women into senior go-to-market roles?
Society? Like, I don't think there's a certain amount. I used to think that businesses could do more than we can. And it has to come from way more than just business, because I've been the only woman in the room for such a very long time. I'm now like one of 2 women in the room, on occasion, maybe 3 women. You start of careers, it's 50-50, and then the women disappear. And it's a combination of, it's really hard to be talked over, ignored, have your ideas stolen, become one of 4 women in the room, then 3 women, then 2 women, and the only woman. And you have to like just have a certain level of thick skin and belief that you want to do something that's worth it. When you get to a point, you're like, why am I doing this? Like, I'm tired. I can go and do something more fun somewhere else. And then you still have having babies. And we lose so many women because they have babies. And the assumption is that women are the ones who are going to go 4 days a week or 3 days a week. Women are the ones that are going to have to do the pickups, drop offs. Women are the ones who have to handle when the nanny's sick, the daycare is closed, or the kid's too ill to go to daycare. And our careers are disproportionately impacted compared to men's careers. And then we disappear. So those are like some areas where, as a man listening to this who has a wife, what can you do? How do you sacrifice your career at times so that your wife's career doesn't get sacrificed? Women listening to it, stop feeling guilty. Your husband's not feeling guilty. It's okay. Ask for more. And then there is also, all of us have a huge amount of unconscious bias. And the problem is, it's unconscious. And so look at your numbers. Notice if women disproportionately leave your business compared to men. Notice if women are disproportionately ranked lower, given worse feedback to men. Notice if you're giving men the benefit of the doubt in a way that you're not giving women. And I use women, it's not just women. Anybody who's not a straight white man is treated differently. And we all do it.
Gosh, yeah, such wise words. And as you say, this is not a quick or easy fix. This is a societal thing as much as a corporate thing. Any practical advice that you would give to not just women, but underrepresented people who want to break into, those executive roles, those leadership roles? So they're not just one in a room, but they are 2 or 3 or 4 in that final room.
Find champions who can really help you get into that room. It's not about having a coach or a mentor. It's having somebody who can be your sponsor, your champion in a sales, like if we're using sales parlance, the person who opens up the door for you, who pushes you forward, who pushes you for promotion. Those people in your career will make your career. Find them, nurture those relationships. And you also have to be outstanding. Like I'll know that women and disproportionately represented people have made it when we have as many mediocre women in the room as we do men. I mean, if you look at it, the women in the room are exceptional and some of the men are and a lot aren't. And so that means that you have to work harder. You have to be better. You have to be exceptional in a way that others don't in order to get noticed. And then also when you're promoting people, like how often do you say, oh, we're going to choose the best person for the job? And if it's two mediocre people, the default will be the man, and they won't even realize why that's the reason. There has to be like a lot of space between the other candidate and the straight white man to have that person be chosen as the best person for the job. So create that space. It's not fair. It's exhausting. But if you're really ambitious, that's what you have to do.
Beth, I think we are going to end on that note. This has been such a brilliant conversation. I think you are an inspiration to other women. You've shown what is possible with hard graft and a thick skin. And, I look up to you as a leader. I knew today's conversation would be good, but I think the level of clarity, I love your brevity sometimes because you cut to the chase and you give us really good insights without waffle. So especially around the topics we've discussed today, it's been incredibly valuable. So thank you, not just for your insights, but for the years of support you've given me, Pavilion, Scalewise. You've always been someone I've looked up to for grounded, practical wisdom, and today was no exception. So thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome, Tom. It was great to be on. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for listening to Making the Grade. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have any questions following this episode, or you'd like to recommend a guest perhaps for our next season, please let us know at podcast@scalewise.com. And if you did enjoy today's episode, please do consider leaving us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We'd really appreciate that. As this is a brand new show, reviews really help us spread the word and reach new listeners. Plus, we'd also love to hear what you're enjoying about our show. Thank you so much for your support, and see you soon for another episode of Making the Grade.